Okay, so let's look at number 4. We're going to skip 3 because it's a weird function. So looking at number 4, you can see that you have, if you compare your exponents, you have x to the first over x squared, right? Because when you multiply and distribute that, that would be x squared. So you can see right there that your horizontal asymptote is going to be 0 because your denominator is bigger than the numerator. And if you were to graph it, you can see that real quick too. Okay, so if you put this graph in your calculator, you've got x over x times x minus 1, and you can see right here my horizontal asymptote. If I look at the end behavior here, right, both ends are going to y equals 0. Okay, and then I can kind of see where my vertical asymptote would be, right? If I look at these ends right here, right, it kind of goes through, and it looks like that would be at 1, when x equals 1. That would be my vertical asymptote. You can see that just by looking at the graph. Let's check out the factors to see if it matches up. Okay, and looking at the factors, you can see, because it's already factored, you can see what would make this denominator 0 would be if x is, if this factor here, if that's 1, 1 minus 1 equals 0, right? So my vertical asymptote is x equals a positive 1, right? It's the opposite, the zeros are opposite of the factors. And then I do have a hole here because I have this factor on top and the bottom, the same factor on the top and bottom. So yes, there is a hole. What value of x is going to make that denominator 0? Well, if x is 0, all right, if x is 0, then my denominator is going to be 0. So that's where the hole would be. And if I wanted to see what the y value at that point would be, I can look at my function. I'll just simplify my function, right? The x's cross out, so that would be 1 over x minus 1, okay? And so if I put a 0 in for x, that would be y equals 1 over negative 1, so y equals negative 1. So that is my, the value of y when x is 0. So that would be where my hole is, all right? Looking at the x-intercept, right? The x-intercept is where y is 0. So what value of y, so that I'm looking at my numerator, all right? That would be where y is 0. Okay, but remember that crossed out, that's where, when x is 0, that's where our hole is. Okay, so does it cross the x-axis? No, because y equals 0, that's my x-axis, all right? So it never crosses the x-axis. All right, so the x-intercept, there would be none. The y-intercept is where x is 0, all right, and that's actually where the hole is, right? When x is 0, y is at negative 1, right? And so that is the hole. All right, so we'll say there's none there either. There's no y-intercept because that's the hole. And then if we're looking at the domain, that's all the x values, right? So you look at where, at your intervals. So let's look at the graph real quick. Okay, so looking at the graph, you can see I've got 2 intervals here. Here's one interval, and here's the other interval. All right, so this interval goes from, x goes from negative infinity, and then it goes all the way to 1, positive 1, and then it, I have to lift up my pencil and come up here, and I go from 1 to positive infinity, okay? So those would be my 2 intervals. My domain is going to be negative infinity to 1, right? The vertical asymptote kind of tells you the domain. And then I've got 1, I pick up at 1 and go to positive infinity. So that's the domain, all right? If I'm looking at the range, I'm looking at the horizontal asymptote, all right? And we said here it never crosses the x-axis. So my range is going to be starting at the bottom So range is the y, so I start down here at negative infinity, and my function goes up until I get to 0, right? So it will be negative infinity to 0. That's this, the range of that. Those are my y values there. And then I have to pick up my pencil so it's discontinuous, and it picks up over here at 0 again, right? Because we're looking at what's happening on the y-axis. That's the range. So I pick up at 0. Oops, I'm off the. So pick up at 0, and then it goes to positive infinity. All right. So basically, it's all real numbers except for 0, if you were to put it in words. All right. So my range went from negative infinity to 0, and it picked up at 0 and went to positive infinity. All right, or you could say all real numbers except 0. X is not equal to 0, like we did with the excluded values. Okay, good job.